Hey there, are you grieving the potential loss of a loved one or feeling overwhelmed with the loss of someone you care about? If so, you're in the right place. Lisa Hartung here, and this podcast is designed to guide you through topics surrounding death and dying. We'll dive into multifaceted aspects of grief, offering you a blend of personal stories, expert insights, and practical advice for your grief journey. May this be a safe space for you to learn, listen, and ask questions about your own life and loved ones. So grab your favorite beverage and let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Giving Grief Grace. Hope you've all had a wonderful week. We are so excited to have Carrie Silver back on the show with us. She is the clinical director of A Haven, which is a nonprofit organization in Exton, Pennsylvania that offers free grief support for grieving children and families. And we've done a little mini series with Carrie, and today caps us off. Our first episode was all about how to talk to children about death and being okay with saying, death and dying, and this person has died. And then the second episode was about dealing with family members and how everyone in the family grieves a little differently. And so how can we meet people and our family members where they are? And so today we are going to focus on community and how, that second layer of support outside of our nuclear family, how can we offer that as friends, as classmates, as teachers, as colleagues? Thank you, Carrie, so much for coming back to the show. I just have thoroughly enjoyed our conversations, and I'm grateful for your time.
I have too, Lisa. It's been great being with you. I'm excited to get to know your community more, and we are really happy to share this resource with anybody who could have help because of it.
Yeah, and for listeners who might want to know a little bit more about A Haven, maybe you could just say a little plug before we dive in.
Sure. So A Haven is a nonprofit. We are 8 years old now. We exist in Chester County, Pennsylvania. That's kind of right outside of Philadelphia. We are part of many other grief centers all through the nation, and there are ways to find those that we can certainly share. But A Haven specifically exists in our community to serve grievers. In our context in Chester County, there's about 8,000 grieving children, and children regrieve their whole life. And so our work is not only to address a loss that has already happened, but also to provide some preventative strategies, knowing that a child experiencing grief, that is considered an adverse childhood experience, and it might be the kind of thing that leads to other behaviors, mental health challenges, and things that we do believe with some early intervention could be prevented or at least greatly reduced. And so we are thrilled to be able to partner with families and schools in that capacity.
Yeah, such a wonderful way to help support children in the community. 8,000 students is such a large number. And so by partnering together and helping those communities, and you never know the ripple effect of how what you say today may, come back. And one thing that I love about A Haven is there's no timeline. So say that the child lost a parent at age 5, then they can still come back at age 10 and age 15 and 20, because you're there throughout their journey.
That's exactly right. We know they will come up with different grief experiences and different grief questions as they themselves continue to change and evolve. And so we just always want to be a safe space that they can do that in.
Yeah. And as we're thinking about, you've worked with hundreds and thousands of community members with grieving families. And I'm really curious to get your thoughts on, any common mistakes that a well-meaning friend or colleague might say. But how do you think is it a really productive way to help a grieving person that maybe someone might have messed up or might not know what to say? So,
Sure. Yeah, and you're exactly right. We don't get this in human training anywhere, right? How to handle grief and any mistakes, if you will, were always well intended. But because people do want to know, is there a right way? There are some best practices. And so I love this question, and I love when people are open to hearing this feedback. Very similar to how we talked about in episode 1, using real words, especially with our youngest friends, helping them understand the permanency, the specialness, the uniqueness of the event. And that also therefore goes to reduce any anxiety of this could happen to me and or just anything that around like somehow it's related to something that already happens. When you allow death to be its own unique event, you also then get to separate it from common concern that kids just sometimes have. Being willing to talk age appropriately but openly with kids and around kids. Kids may not always know what we're talking about, but they do know when grown-ups stop talking because they walk in the room or suddenly we're really editing or like not using whole sentences. And so being willing to have conversations in children's presence with them is actually really helpful. It starts building that early trust, starts building that early reciprocity. I talk about this, you talk about this. And so those are just some really good fundamental things we're starting at any age, but really just it's a modeling, right? Of just even though this is uncomfortable, we can acknowledge the discomfort, but we're still going to do it together anyway. And then I would also say, when we as a community, when someone dies, kind of shift into a posture of this is a crisis. It is traumatic for sure, and it is awful for a family to go to. But a crisis implies that there is a danger present, there is a threat present, and as soon as we can get rid of that, we are back in. We're back to normal, we're back to whatever. There is no back to in grief. Something awful did happen, but it is not short term, and it is not dramatic impact and then a back off. And so when we act like something is a crisis, it also allows us as a community to exit quicker of like, okay, well, they're eating again, they're back at school, like we must be good. We are not good. And so allowing something awful to happen and then allowing something awful to remain. And yes, the impact will shift, the intensity will shift, but stay with the person in many different ways. And I know we've talked about that some, we may even talk about that more today. But also when we try to kind of really recommend or dare I even say push for counseling too early, especially from a kid standpoint. Now, grown-ups, that's different. But for kids, this awful thing just happened. And now somebody is asking me to go sit and usually talk with words I don't have yet about a concept I can't even wrap my mind around yet with a person I probably don't really know. And then to not be unwilling to do that sometimes communicates like, oh, well, then now they think something else is wrong, that I'm not willing to go do this thing. Like death is a normal part of life. You will know when a child needs help. And it's usually not in those first couple weeks or months in the sense of counseling can't fix this. And communicating to a child, there's this thing you need to do that is actually also hard, that talking to the stranger with words you don't understand yet, like let's give the family some time. And counseling recommendations are a good thing. It's the timing of it and what it communicates that would just be something else a community could consider doing differently.
Yeah, and looking for cues with the child, right?
Yeah.
Of, not forcing, as you said, of just really leaning into where are they on this journey and what are they open to discuss or chat about. And yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation for all parties,
Yes.
and being okay with naming that up front and saying, hey, this is a challenging time. And so one thing that we found is, if children don't feel comfortable chatting with their parents, maybe someone at school, say a teacher or a guidance counselor, if they do know, like, and trust that person. I know that a Haven works with teachers and guidance counselors.
Mhm.
And so say that there is a student in that is grieving in the class right now, and the teachers or the counselors aren't really sure how to help. What are some important things that they can do in the classroom moving forward to kind of help support that person?
Sure. This is such a common thing that comes up. So I'm so glad we're getting to talk about this. It is
Yeah.
my greatest privilege to get to work with teachers and school counselors because kiddos don't turn their grief off when they go to school. And so often this is a big burden for the classroom teacher and then anybody else to be carrying along with this child. And so my first guidance to school teachers and counselors is always like, check your own capacity first. It's okay to
Mhm.
acknowledge like, this is too much for me as teacher, as school counselor, and
Yeah.
let yourself be a bridge to somebody else in the building that right now it's not too much for. Teachers, school counselors often carry their own grief. They're carrying a lot of stress from their classrooms, from their own personal lives, and sometimes this feels like that final straw. It's one more thing because it is usually present most days, most of the time through the day. And so build your team in your building of who else can carry this with you to support this child.
Mm.
Because no one grown up, parent, school teacher, whomever should be carrying this by themselves. And especially a teacher, like that is not even what they're in the classroom for. So first off, just be willing to bridge your capacity with other grown-ups in your building.
Yeah, and as teachers, you're not necessarily trained in grief counseling.
That's exactly right. Or and how to just like support that in the classroom, right? I mean, we have some training on like mental health supports in the classroom, but this even just feels a little outside of it. Start with just letting your student tell the story of their person, right? The death is one part of that person's story, but not the wholeness of their relationship. And one of the hardest things for teachers and school counselors to turn off is like, and you don't have to actually do anything about it. You're not listening for an action item. You're not listening for a to-do list. You're just learning, like, who was your person? How did they die? Things like, what do you remember? What do you wish about your person? What helps you remember your person? And then you can also ask, like, how's the rest of your family doing? Just get a little pulse. Like, what are the child's other supports? What's the temperature on all of this? And that could change day to day, especially given the age of the child. And then you can ask to, again, to your own comfort or bridge it to someone else. How often would you like to talk about this? Could we play their favorite game? Do you want to bring in their favorite song or a picture of their person? Just an invitation to have their person in the room with, and yet it doesn't have to have a schedule or a to-do list. And so just even showing a willingness to help remember their person and be a person you can talk to about it or to bridge them to somebody who can be tremendously healing. At
Mm.
some point, it will be helpful for people in the building to know what triggers this child relative to their person. There
Mm.
could be certain reading content. Maybe in music class, they're featured on an instrument that their person played. Like it could be anywhere. And it's just helpful. It's helpful for the kid to learn, like, oh, that's why I feel that way every time we read about this, talk about that. But also, it's just helpful for the building to know. And again, that might change. And what triggered last year doesn't trigger this year. It's a moving target. But again, the willingness to have the conversation says, like, I recognize you are changing and your relationship to this grief is changing. So let's keep talking about it.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. And I love how you said recognizing what those triggers are and how they
Mhm.
make the student feel,
Yeah. Yep.
and being mindful of that and kind of walking through that with them. And sometimes it could be a joyful memory, but then, you have that joy and then it's the missing that happens after. It's something that I like how you said everyone in the building can help.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's just, and I think that's a wonderful thing about schools is that it's a community approach. It takes a village.
Yes.
And so we're all here to help the students excel and feel comfortable and be that safe space where they feel they can come and be themselves. When you work with, I know that you partner with schools and offer in-school grief groups. What difference does it make to bring a support into a child's everyday environment or student's everyday environment rather than asking the family to do it on their own and come after hours?
Yeah. Well, it can be tremendously helpful because sometimes families just don't have capacity to do
Mm.
it anywhere else. And yet we don't want that grief to go unsupported.
Yeah.
We know kiddos, even at the earliest ages, but especially as they get older, are just constantly sizing themselves up and just hyper aware when they are different than their peers. So to give them other peers who have also had this traumatic experience can be wildly helpful before we even get to any coping skills. Just like, I'm not the only person whose mom has died. I'm not the only person who thinks about this at school. I'm not the only person. Like, just tremendously, tremendously helpful. And so that holding space and that shared community is a great first thing. Recently, I just had a meeting with my school team this week, and a couple of the high schoolers had shared in a group that they can say things in group that they can't say at home. Some of them are experiencing some real anger. They want to know why their person didn't stop whatever behavior it was that contributed health-wise or otherwise to their death. And they don't feel like they can say that because it feels like they're criticizing their person. But we've created an environment like, we know that's not your intent,
Yeah.
But the anger is very real. The question is super valid. And so, like, yeah, let's talk about it. We had an elementary school teacher share, like, I was there for training in their school, and she said, I just wish you could come every day. She said, he comes back to class skipping down the hallway later after his time. And so these common misconceptions of like, oh my goodness, now they're thinking about this heavy thing, they're gonna cry the whole time. Like just having that place actually is very supportive and they're able to transition back into their day because they also aren't looking to just hold this heavy burden all day. They had a specific time, they could set it down with some other people, and they don't always pick it up in full to take it back into their day. Sometimes they can leave some of it behind. So
Yeah.
that can be just really helpful. As we talked about, teachers don't get any formal training on this. And
Mm.
sometimes grief looks like diagnosable things. If you have a child who's kind of emotionally reactive, maybe having a hard time controlling their body, controlling their peer relationships, sometimes without a grief awareness lens, we start looking at that and being like, oh, it could be this or this, and perhaps we need medication, perhaps, and possibly. But grief is an important thing to consider. And so by allowing this to come into schools or just allowing this to be part of the school day in some capacity sometimes can help raise awareness of like, maybe we're not looking at a diagnostic label, we're just looking at a fresh grief experience.
hmm Which can again arise at any point
Yes,
in a student's journey.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
When you were saying the individual skipping down the hallway, I'm thinking of this. It really is a safe capsule, right?
Yes.
You walk into the room and it's almost like you can exhale.
Yes.
People
There's,
understand me on
yes,
like a deep level here. I don't have to be, hey, how's your day going? It's
right.
really, no, tell me, how are you doing?
Yes, exactly. Like my person still gets to be part of my school day. Some kids really struggle with that. Like they've never met my teacher. They don't know what I'm like in second grade, seventh grade, whatever. It helps them pseudo feel like that's still a part of things. And it just really gives them that space where, similar how we talked about with the grown-ups previously, they
Mhm.
don't have to explain a lot. Like we already get it. We can get
Yeah.
to the other parts of things. But yet, from a child's perspective who hasn't had that experience, when they think they are the only person who has had that particular thought or wanted that particular experience or been mad about, and then they feel guilt about being mad about their person. And a circle of kids goes, no, I'm mad too. And I also wish I wasn't, but I am. That is just tremendously supportive. And you can't recreate that anywhere else.
hmm Yeah, Carrie, thank you so much for talking about that. And I totally see how great it is to have a grief group, right? There are perfect times for one-on-one situations. Then when you bring in the grief group for students, they have that even outside of that one sacred space where they can share together. They know as they're walking through the hallway, that's someone that they can associate with. And maybe it's just a hello or something, but that's again a net or a point in their wider community that they know that that's a safe space. So,
Yes. And similar to what we said about, even as a teacher, school counselor professional, building that bridge in the building for like other grown-ups that can help care for this child. When
yeah.
they're aware of other grievers, that's part of their bridge too. So maybe it's not teacher needs to sit with the child. Maybe the teacher can allow for some extra time, like, hey, why don't we make sure you and so connect today? And so that can also just be another tool the building can use to take some pressure off the staff, but still support both students well.
hmm Yeah, and I love that of again, tapping someone in to say, hey, they might have more capacity or they have more of a connection with
Mhm.
this individual.
Yeah.
So let's, make space for it. And I think that that's such a beautiful way to support. And for people that don't necessarily have a haven, it's like, gosh, I wish you guys lived closer. So, so we could have that support in our schools. If a family member is listening to this or a teacher is listening to this, or anyone in administration saying, okay, what types of things should we advocate for in our school district
Mhm.
to get this added support? Because there isn't always funding, right? As we said, that this isn't part of a normal teacher training. And yes, we have guidance counselors, but maybe the grief training wasn't as magnified as perhaps it might be in certain areas. So what can families or administrations think about and advocate for their students?
Sure. So on like a staff level, oftentimes you will find even a licensed counselor in your area or a licensed social worker who does have grief training and, grief is a passion point for them. So asking them to do some professional development for your staff can be fantastic. Sometimes that can be done in person. I know even a Haven does it virtually. And so those kinds of things, the resources are there if you'd like to learn collectively. There are tremendous social media accounts to follow, different websites to just continue to learn. And again, wanting to make sure we're holding it safely and also not over programming, right? So there's
Mm,
not, again, a to-do list. We have a curriculum in the sense of just we have a certain order and rhythm we want to go in, but we have multiple options per week, and our facilitators know you might need to just go with whatever the kids want to do that week because that is the important work. And so this isn't, something unfortunately like a lot of standard school curriculum, for instance, where, like you have to really stick to it, the rigidity of it. Right.
mm,
And so training is always available to staff professionals as they're comfortable with learning about it. Again, we wouldn't want to force this on anybody in their own experiences. And then even just parents, caregivers in their larger community who maybe are like, I would love to have something like this. We don't have a formal center. Reaching out to hospital social workers, hospice situations, different faith communities. There are other grievers out there. And so it doesn't have to come through the formality of a center. Even just saying, I just want to talk with some other grievers, a meetup in a park, a coffee date, try it one time and just see how it goes. And again, the goal is not to find out how much you have alike, right? Like it's not like we were both widowed 2 years ago. We have 3.5 kids. It's really just the I see in you, the struggle, the way it changes daily. And let's hope we're not actually having bad days on the same day. Wouldn't it be great if on your bad day, I can be there for you and vice versa? And so low expectation, just going in for to show yourself and your children and your school, we're not alone. This is a common challenge and it is a real challenge.
yeah. And again, naming it up front and then creating that space. And so I love that you said there are online resources, and I love that a Haven will offer those support sessions online as well to help educate other educators or community members. So I think
Yeah.
that that's again, it's being resourceful. There are so many online tools, and you sent over the book list, and so happy to share that with listeners who are interested in, at different ages. What can I talk about or do with my person, my
Yeah.
student? Our child. And one thing that we've talked about before is, and that I wanted to touch on that you had mentioned today was meeting them where they are that day. And so maybe it's we're going to do art today and, talk about our emotions through art. And then maybe it's actually today we need to move our bodies.
Mhm.
So let's, do a little workout or a little dance, or maybe it's going walk around the block, just being open to that flexibility of supporting, advocating for those additional support layers for whenever the child is ready for that. So sometimes when someone dies, everyone is with the family right then and there, and maybe for the first week, maybe for the first month. But after time, people stop calling, and then it becomes kind of this like awkward situation where the person is still grieving and they feel like they have to quote unquote get over it. And maybe people have said that, like, oh yeah, your mom died 2 years ago, so you should, get over it. Or, oh yeah, your brother died, so that was 18 years ago. Why aren't you over it yet? But it's a lifelong, this is like a little, you have a place in your heart for grief, and it can make people uncomfortable. And so, what do you wish, every friend and neighbor of a grieving family knew about just showing up and being present? And what are some guidelines that you see?
Yeah. I would first say, like, you never need permission to remember their person or ask. how they're doing about that specifically.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, I don't know, like she seems to be having a great day. Should I have asked something? Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Like she can be having a great day and also the impact of her loss is present, right? And so either she's going to get to say, like, hey, yeah, I'm actually in a really great space now. Like, great, you get to celebrate with them. Or you can be like, yeah, I'm, keeping it together today because we've got a lot going on. But last night, everybody was up with nightmares. Like we just never know. And so just giving them space, you can always ask. And asking can come a lot of ways. It can come through a verbal conversation. It could be a text message, thinking of you today, wondering how it's going, and trying to give some reference to, right? Because thinking of you can mean lots of things, and you want to acknowledge why we're asking. It can be if you happen to be with someone's grief experience when it first happens, you'll actually learn a lot about their person, which will help you remember about them later. So let's say you see the obituary or you attend whatever memorial situation happens, and you hear that like that person really loved baseball and really like well, guess what? Every spring when baseball comes on is probably a season where they're noticing the absence of their person. They would have loved to have watched this game. They would have been so mad that team went to the World Series, whatever it is. So you
Mm.
can set a reminder in your phone every March. Just check in, right? Like, notice baseball's on again. It made me think of your person. How are you guys doing? Those kinds of things can just be tremendously helpful. So if you're there in those early days, take some notes, put some things on the calendar, realize like that's actually going to be what fuels them. They are sharing with you up front just the most important, funny things, serious things, interests of their person. And that's ultimately what's going to be what carries with them. And so those kinds of things can be really good. Of course, any anniversaries, whether it be the person's birthday, their death anniversary, if there was a marriage or relationship anniversary that they celebrated, anything like that would be a great time of remembrance and check-in.
Yeah.
Major holidays that were important to the family. And so anything like that could be just a really easy way to cue yourself, pre-schedule it, not because you're in, our lives get busy too, right? As non-grievers. And yet it
Yeah.
doesn't mean we are thinking of them any less, but the more we can kind of cue ourselves, the better off that continued remembrance is going to be.
Mm. I love that you said put something in your notes. And I think this is just a general great practice
Mhm.
to have, those who you're close with have a little list of dates, things they like. Again, stories about their loved one. So it's like cued recall of,
Yes.
okay, this person feels like they're having a bad day. Let me go to my notes app and go to that person's, I have a note on that person and
Yeah.
what can I, bring to them that would bring them joy.
Yep.
We do that when we have new hires come on board at work, like
Yes. Yes.
of how to support you, but you never know how much it's, even if it's just a little, I'm thinking of you again, baseball season starting and your mom or dad would have loved baseball season or they love chocolate and so it's a chocolate festival and so thinking
Yes.
of your brother or your mom.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that it's those little reminders. And earlier on in the show, I'd interviewed Kelly Edmondson, who lost her son unexpectedly and
Mm.
created Timely Presence, where you sign up and they will send really meaningful gifts throughout the year on
Beautiful.
you just put in the special dates and
Hmm.
then a gift arrives at the bereaved person's door. It's a really tangible way to say, I'm thinking of you.
Hmm.
And the gifter gets a notification to say, "Hey, your person's going to receive a gift on this day," and then that's like again a cute recall to say,
That's
"Yes,
really beautiful. Yes.
um, we're here for you. We
Right.
love you."
Yep.
My girlfriend sends me flowers on the day that my mom died every year,
Mm.
regardless of where she's living in the world, because she she lives up, she lives abroad. Uh,
Okay. Yep.
so it's just
How
so.
special that is.
Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
that lifelong friendship of
Yes.
I didn't forget.
Yep.
And you're still in my mind, even though it happened a number of years ago. So
Hmm.
I love that. Um, And yeah, again, grief makes people feel uncomfortable, but also if you have those fun stories that make the person laugh and be like, "Oh my gosh, that's something that I love at least when someone messages me and say, "Hey, I saw this and I just started laughing and I thought about you and your person."
Yes.
I
Such a gift. Such a gift.
like little bursts of sunshine in someone's day. They're like, "Oh, they not only are thinking of me, but they're thinking of my loved one," and
Yes.
keeping that story alive. And so, thinking about as we move forward as a collective community,
Hmm.
we have support on the one-on-one front. We have support on the grief group front. But again, different family members are going to have different levels of not ability, but
Capacity. Yeah.
capacity to
Hmm.
actually be engaging in those groups.
Hmm.
And then we also have this another support where at school where we can have in-school sessions either with one-on-one with a counselor or with a group with
Hmm.
other people who have lost loved ones.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, Carrie, if there are different supports that we can help with students for, sometimes their loved one may have died from violence
Hmm.
or by suicide,
Hmm.
and or another loved one may have had an illness, and
Hmm.
maybe it was a premature illness and it took their life. Are there any tools that you would have to help the student with the type of loss that it was?
Sure. Well, especially in the first two that you mentioned, suicide and or violence, as a community, we have some stigma attached to those.
Yeah.
And that's usually some of the time that we need to spend specifically for that type of population to relieve them of that in our space, to remind them that just like especially the kids will love to talk about like the boomers or different generations. Like, there's always been different and older ways of thinking about any number of things.
Yeah.
That applies to that too. And so they get to be part of a space and a generation creating a new narrative and correcting some of our community awareness about things, as we often have to do with many topics. And
Mhm.
so, again, that can feel a little empowering. Like you have the ability to advocate because that was not true about your loved one. That's not been your lived experience. And you don't have to let people to continue to think about or talk about anybody in either of those situations like that. And so helping them establish that boundary, helping them to feel empowered to do something about it, and helping them know that people who, like me, deal with this all the time do not carry that for them. That in and of itself can be really supportive and healing because, again, in that common space, like sometimes that is the only room where they sometimes in out in the community, they feel like they both have to defend their person against common misconceptions. And yet also they're angry too, and they feel some blame too. And so they feel like there's even more places they can't acknowledge that because somehow that would feed a narrative that overall they don't support. And
Mm.
so allowing those types of grievers to have space for both. The common misconceptions about your person are 100% not true, and you are still entitled to every feeling about what happened that any other griever also gets to have. And so that would be that type of thing. And then people who have loved ones who die prematurely from illness, but sometimes it relates to that other types of cause of death too. There's really that sense of they suddenly become aware of just mortality in a way that they didn't, because this is not like how laws of life are supposed to work. Giving them space to be confused, also maybe a little bit angry about that. And especially if it was an anticipatory death, such as like a cancer or a chronic illness, where maybe there was some palliative care, hospice care, they have been waiting and maybe close to this happening, not happening for so long that there's an exhaustion that shows up at the event that someone where it was like an immediate unexpected event is a little bit different. So sometimes that
Yeah.
pre-work has been really supportive and sometimes it has been very exhausting. Sometimes it's been both. And so allowing some space for that too. You've been losing this person for a long time. There's some of you that has already been actively grieving, and yet again that new permanency and like, well, how many other times did I think this was almost going to happen and it didn't, but then this time it did. It's very overwhelming. And so allowing some space for all of that to settle.
Mm. Yeah, the anticipatory grief is so hard. And if there wasn't, right, if it was an immediate, the person is like, oh my gosh, my day to day has just completely changed
Yes.
literally overnight.
Yes.
And what does life look like now? Because I hadn't prepared myself for this. And again, it's that community support coming with curiosity, and really helping the person, and just being there, right? And you don't have to say anything,
Yeah.
just being present.
That's exactly right.
Like we don't
That's
have to,
exactly right.
yeah. And so if there's any listeners that are thinking, oh my gosh, if they're, family members, educators, friends, community members, either someone in the church or, someone at the co-op,
Mhm.
um, what's something that a takeaway that they might have, just knowing in the grief space, what have you seen as the clinical director to help
Mhm.
that might help them as they go into the world and support their community?
I would say stay active in educating yourself. Like I
Mm,
mentioned, like for those who are on social media, there are some really great people out there who are just doing small chunks of education, right? Like no one has to write a dissertation on this, and yet just learning new language, learning new postures of just how to stand and be with the person. Also, caring for yourself in the discomfort, if and when you do get to be with the griever. Yes, what happened to them is tremendously impactful, and yet also that does not cancel out your discomfort being with them.
mhm.
Sometimes you'll kind of hear a message like, well, what they went through is so awful. Like the least I can do is go over every day or, do this. And then like they burn out in their care because somehow they've decided like their care is not worth replenishing as they continue. Like you're being a first responder. There's
Yeah.
opportunity to care for yourself and again to share that load with many people, continuing to keep it in your awareness, continuing to care for yourself in it is just that is ultimately how you are going to support any grievers of any age.
Yeah. And staying curious, both about the new waves. I like how you said the boomers, the Gen Zers, the
Yeah.
millennials. We all learned how to talk about and discuss grief differently. And so staying with the times, technology updates, so did the tools that we can
Yes.
use to help one another.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in seeing how AI can help us and provide, just be another tool to help individuals move through grief and think about healthy ways, to help and cope, and heal. And so I know I'm thinking about the support that a Haven offers from our small friends to, teenage and adult
Mhm.
friends. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you all do. So, Carrie, I would love to just dive into, when you're going into a school, what does a grief group look like at a kindergarten level versus, say, a sophomore or a high school level?
Mhm. I think your listeners might be surprised to find actually not very different. We'll go a little slower with kindergartners, we'll use more simple language, but our high schoolers become the most engaged when we play in group just as much as we do with the kindergartners. So we use a lot of something called model magic. It's very much like Play-Doh. We'll shape our feelings, we'll fundamentally use it as a fidget. Our high schoolers, we have dry erase paddles. And so sometimes when we're asking questions and it's more of like a game type style, they'll write their answer on a paddle and flip it up. They want to play just as much as the little guys do. And so, for instance, currently in our curriculum for our opening week, we use a book called The Rabbit Listened. And it's written at an elementary school level, but we also read it with our high schoolers because the rabbit tries to visit with all of his friends as something happens, and each of the first friends responds differently in a way the rabbit is not ready for. So the bear is yelling, the ostrich puts his head in the sand. And so there is so much the kids get out of that, and it generates discussion in a way instead of us being like, tell us a time somebody didn't react well for you. They're like, oh, I've had an ostrich, I've had a bear. Like it just gives them some common language. And so, where our elementary school, our kindergarten friends might take things a little literally, the high school friends understand what we're going for, but they really appreciate and need that kid like entryway, if you will, to continue the conversation.
Hmm. And having that story helps as a framework for them to say, oh, yes, I've
Mhm.
experienced this too.
Yep, it creates those shortcuts again because throughout the group, then they'll talk about like, my brother was such a bear this week. And the group knows what that means. And it's different than had they just happened to mention that in English class that day.
It's that common language. And again, it's the knowing of they get it, right? We're in this group together. They understand, and that gives them some more language. And I love
Yes,
the idea of also offering space for high schoolers to play because
yes,
that's not really something that they get very much. And
that's
so
right.
for parents also to keep that in mind at home if they're going through a challenging time. That
Exactly. And just like we talked about, the kids don't have to do it. Everybody has the opportunity to pass on talking or the activity. And also, similar to how we've talked about, it's that doing something while we talk.
Mhm.
Our high
Yeah.
schoolers have a week where they create a vision board. Like, what do you want your life knowing you have your missing person to look like over the next year and we bring the magazines and they flip through them cutouts so kids just draw, and so these are just beautiful things that we're sitting together and creating, and so helping them see like this isn't just something we're trying to pull from the past, but it's very much in the present. We're trying to build to the future. It's just something that they really enjoy getting to do.
Yeah, building toward the future, right? Because sometimes that can be scary. We
Yeah.
knew what life was like, but now it's changed. And so
Hmm.
helping to create some magic and some joy for the future
Hmm.
is, so helpful. So, oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Carrie. I really appreciate you walking through that and knowing that, there's support and resources at each stage.
That's right.
And we're here for you. And Haven is such a great resource. So thank you again for everything that you do. And thank you, Carrie, for sitting down with me to go through all of the different ways that we can support grievers
Hmm.
and support ourselves, right, as we're helping. Right? We have to put our oxygen mask on first. And so,
Yes.
mental well-being is vitally important. And, walking through different ways to give space
Hmm.
to grievers is so important. So thank you, Carrie, for your time. And for listeners who are like, yes, I want to check out a haven, where can they find a haven and find some resources?
Sure. So our website is ahaven.org. Our socials, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at ahaven.chesco. Also, anyone can email me, Carrie at ahaven.org, and we can be happy to connect you with resources more specific to your area if somehow you're not in our area. And I'm just so grateful for this time, Lisa. It's been really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carrie. And I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes so listeners can follow along.
Mhm.
But grateful for what you and A Haven do for the community and for the greater well-being of the grief space.
Mhm.
I think that the more we can talk about this and support one another, the better. And so, again, so grateful. So thank you so much and hope you have a great week.
Thank you, Lisa. You too.
All right. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Giving Grief Grace. It would be such a gift if you could share this episode with someone and brighten their day. You never know what will happen. Subscribe to get a weekly dose of positivity, and while you're at it, please leave a review. May you be kind to yourself in the week ahead and give yourself grace. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.